Thank you very much. That then brings us to our next speaker. And as we've already acknowledged during the day, perhaps our biggest challenge at this stage in terms of where we're going with our industry, biosecurity. Dr. Gideon is an international heavyweight. He made us proud at the OIE, and he was also honored in that regard. And over and above that, he's a dear friend of our industry. He played a vital role in the biosecurity task team, and is currently playing a vital role in terms of the day-to-day decisions on a technical basis when we are dealing with all these new outbreaks. Dr. Gideon, we would like to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Gerrit. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
It's a great pleasure to speak to you. Although I'm sorry I can't be there. I hope it will suffice by using the technology, and I hope I come right to the technology. So the main topic that we will address is to look at biosecurity and animal health to see what is the responsibility of the producer, and is it something that the producer should be involved with or worry about? So what I will do is to address the most important issues. I can't do everything in this short time span, but to look at use the current outbreak of and threat of foot-and-mouth disease as a template to link that to biosecurity. And then I think for all of us, it's very important that we know what we are talking about. What is biosecurity? For me, it is something that is as old as farming itself. It's something we've applied since everybody started farming in biblical times. And we're just giving it now a fancy, but it is the same thing that's been applied in many, many ways over many, many years to prevent the spread of disease. But I will give you a more definite or a clearer definition on that from the view of the OIE. Then what we will look at is just shortly look at the most important threats in terms of biosecurity. What are the things currently that we should worry about in terms of biosecurity? And then what is the current awareness about animal health biosecurity in South Africa? Are we, as red meat farmers, fully or really aware what it is and what we should do? And then also, I just said that biosecurity is a very old concept. It's the same as people talking about compartments. Compartment is just a new name for something that we know for many, many years. It's been applied in the feedlot industry. It's been applied in the poultry industry and the secure farming that we had in the swine fever control area. So it's biosecurity that there are things that is already available, and we just have to see how that fits in and how does that teach us about biosecurity. I'll give you some examples on that. Then lastly, I think it's important that we look at the most important procedures for the farmer, for the producer, for effective biosecurity. Nou, as ons kyk taal praat, ons praat dan van wat is die aanvaarbare internasionale standaard of definisie van biosekuriteit. En ek dink, omdat Suid-Afrika en 182 lande wêreld is lid van die OIE en dat ons een standaard het, en dit is, as die OIE 'n definisie maak, dan word dit geïmpliseer dat dit is ook 'n internasionale standaard. So die definisie van die OIE is basies dat dit is al daardie maatreëls wat ons moet neem om die risiko vir die inbring, maar ook die verspreiding van dieresiektes te voorkom. Dit is die kern van biosekuriteit. En as jy terugdink wat ek nou vroeër gesê het, is dit iets wat elke regdenkende boer in elk geval al vir jare doen, maar daar is net 'n goeie of 'n slegte manier om dit te doen. Dan kan ons nie van biosekuriteit praat, en die OAE het dan ook 'n definisie daarvoor, vir 'n biosekuriteitplan. So dit wat ons doen op ons plaas, die produsent of in 'n voerkraal, moet wees volgens bepaalde prosedures en maatreëls, hoe klein ook al, wat ons saamstel en wat ons toepas om die risiko van die breuk in die biosekurireitketting teen te werk. So jy het 'n definisie van biosekuriteit, en dan moet jy ook 'n plan hê hoe jy daai biosekuriteit beginsel sal toepas. Dit help nie om skielik hier op nommer 9 net op besluit, maar hier's nou 'n bedreiging van werk en closure, en nou moet ons skielik dit doen. Dit moet reeds in plek wees in terme van 'n biosekuriteitplan. As ons kyk na die risikofaktore reg oor die wêreld en ook in Suid-Afrika vir wat beïnvloed biosekuriteit? En hierdie skets daar aan die regterkant, ek hoop julle kan hom duidelik sien, dis een wat Fred Meton jare gelede al gemaak het, waar hy die bedreiging vir die rooi vleisbedryf uitspel in 'n pragtige skets. En een van hulle kan julle sien is daai blou dier, en dit is back and close, en dit is vandag net so waar as daai tyd toe hy die skets gemaak het. Maar as ons kyk na die opsomming van die belangrikste biosekuriteitsrisiko's op die oomblik, en ook al vir baie jare, en is een van die sterkste een is maar nog steeds internasionale beweging en handel. En ons kan dit kleiner trek ook in terme van nasionale en lokale beweging en handel in diere. Dit weet ons nou almal, die wêreld het ook nou daarna verwys, die risiko's wat ons het in terme van beweging. Dit is nog steeds in terme van nasionaal, lokaal en internasionaal die grootste bedreiging vir die breuk in biosekuriteit en om biosekuriteit maatreëls te toets en te bewys, is hulle nog reg of is hulle nog nie in plek nie. En dan die hele storie rondom, ek gaan nie daaroor ingaan nie, dit het julle alreeds ook baie van gehoor, die hele storie van die globalisering van landbou en handel, en dan ook wat ons gesien het, as ons die parallel kan trek na die menslike faktor met die COVID-19, die hele aanpassing van bakterieë en virusse, soos die omstandighede verander om op 'n nuwe manier te voortskry te kry, en dit kry ons ook in dieresiektes redelik baie, dat daar 'n mutasie is en 'n aanpassing van patogene, en wat ons baie op ons tone moet bly om ook daai bron van bedreiging vir biosekuriteit betyds die hoof te bied. En dan, ons weet dit almal en almal praat daaroor, en dit is die hele storie rondom verandering. Ek gaan nie nou daar in besonder nie, dit is 'n lesing heel op sy eie. En dan ook die verandering in die omgewing, wat 'n baie belangrike rol speel, en dan die verandering in die vatbaarheid van die spesies en diere vir siektes. Ek dink nie ons moet dit uit die oog uit verloor nie. Dis 'n ding wat van tyd tot tyd gedurig verander. En die volgende ene is armoede, en 'n goeie voorbeeld het ons nou gesien in Suid-Afrika met die vinnige verspreiding, soveel so dat dit nou 'n epidemie is in Suid-Afrika in terme van dieresiektes, en dit is varkpes, wat van bo uit die noorde uit versprei tot onder in die Kaap, en 'n groot rol daarin was die gebrek aan, of die voedsel-onsekuriteit, en die nodigheid om 'n baie goedkoop bron van vleis baie vinnig te versprei, en nog steeds versprei, en in party plekke is dit onmoontlik nou om daai siekte heeltemal onder beheer te kry. En dan ekonomiese ontwikkeling en tegnologie. So ons moet net nigter oor al hierdie bedreiging vir biosekuriteit kyk, en dan raak dit vir ons ook maar logies om daarna te kyk. Now, if we look what we have available already in terms of measures to decrease or mitigate the risk in terms of biosecurity. And if you think carefully about it, if you look, for example, at the Animal Health Act and the regulations, each Act says you must do this or you cannot do that. And why? It all points to what we had earlier in terms of the regulation, how to prevent the introduction and the spread of diseases. So the crux of the approach of the Animal Health Act and regulations is aimed at biosecurity. And if you look at it that way, I think in many ways you'll appreciate the act, but also realize the rationale behind many things and why we should be very careful that people obey that and comply with that regulations. And the same holds true for the Animal Meat Safety Act and the regulations. And then you all know that in terms of the new control measure that was introduced now, I think 2 years ago already for auctions, those requirements that need to be met for arranging auctions, but also conducting auctions. And unfortunately, it looks like in the recent outbreaks in the country, the one in Limpopo and also the one in Northwest, there was not compliance with those things that you introduced in good faith, and people don't obey by that. And then we all know about the hazard plans at abattoirs. They all aim to mitigate the risk at very critical points in the ante and post-mortem process. That is also risk reduction in terms of biosecurity. And then the act on veebrandmerke, that one, dit weet ons, dit is ook een wat in beginsel daarop gemik is om te help onwettige beweging, ongecontroleerde beweging, om dit ook op 'n manier te beheer. En dan natuurlik die OHI-kode in sy geheel is ook gemik op biosekuriteit. So, een ding wat ons van moet bewus wees, dit is dat die virusse en die bakterieë daar buite is nie altyd sigbaar nie. And we can't always see them, and we are not always aware of them, but they are our enemies. And what we have to do to talk biosecurity, we have to be aware of what we are fighting. We are fighting human behavior, controlling the introduction of risk, but we must also be aware what lies behind that risk. And that is pathogens that we don't see with the eye, but are the primary cause of the break in biosecurity. Nou, iets wat ons nou al hoe meer beginne bewus raak, ook as ons weer parallelle trek na die menslike kant toe, is die zoonotiese potensiaal van siektes en die impak wat dit het op biosekuriteit. Dit is bekend dat 60% van al die menslike patogene wat ons nou van weet, is hier zoonose. Dit beteken, kan aangesteek word van diere na mense. Ek hoef nie as voorbeeld te noem, julle ken dit almal. Dis griep, koolgriep, dis hondsdolheid, baie van hulle. En dan ook ander, ek sal nie hulle nou bespreek nie. Dan, wat ons ook van bewus moet wees in terme van biosekuriteit, is dat 80% van al hierdie patogene het meer as een gasheer. Dit wil sê, soos back and close hier, is nie net beeste nie, dit is ook skape en bokke en ander gespleethoewige diere, wat almal 'n rol speel in die bedreiging van biosekuriteit. En dan vandag word dit algemeen erken dat 75% of meer selfs van die opkomende dieresiektes het 'n zoonotiese potensiaal. Dit wil sê, kan van diere na mense versprei. En dan iets wat ons ook van bewus is, dat die bioterrorisme potensiaal van baie van hierdie patogene word al hoe meer, die mense is bang daarvoor, vir ook die bedreiging van biosekuriteit. En dan, wat hiermee saamgaan, is dat by al die nuwe menslike siektes kom van 'n dierereservoir. En dan laastens, dit weet ons nou, maar ons besef nie altyd dit in terme van biosekuriteit. En dit as siektes kan vandag vinniger oor die wêreld sprei. 'n land as die gemiddelde inkubasieperiode van 'n siekte. As ons byvoorbeeld vat wat die OIE se standaard definisie 7 dae is, maar net die OIE definisie, die werklike inkubasieperiode kan so kort soos 3 dae wees. In 3 dae kan 'n virus versprei van China af na Suid-Afrika met 'n vliegtuig voor die dier en die siekte al weet. Dit wil sê korter as die inkubasieperiode. En selfs in ons eie land, dier kan die siekte optel, maar nog nie die siekte wys nie, en dan kan hy môreoggend in die Kaap wees en dalk die siekte daar sprei. So dit moet ons van diere en dierlike produkte, die spoed waarmee dit gebeur, is al hoe belangriker om te besef in terme van biosekuriteit. Hierdie is 'n spotprent wat onlangs in 'n Hollandse koerant verskyn het, en dit sê vir ons duidelik waar staan ons op die oomblik met voëlgriep, varkpes, malkoei siekte, COVID en ook nou die hele storie rondom aappokke. Die verhouding tussen die menslike en die dierlike geneeskunde begin al hoe nouer na mekaar toe trek. So wat ons reeds gesê het, is dat die maatreëls wat nodig is om die toepassing van biosekuriteit vereis, dat ons reeds genoem het, die vinnige verspreiding wêreldwyd van die siektes vinniger as die inkubasieperiode, dan dink ek moet ons dit erken, daar is nie meer plek in die wêreld waarvandaan ons te ver of waarvan ons afgesonder is in terme van 'n biosekuriteitsrisiko vir siekteverspreiding. Dit is net 'n feit wat ons moet aanvaar. Soos wat dit gegeld het, wat die siekte baie vinnig versprei het, van China af tot reg oor die wêreld, dieselfde geld ook vir dieresiektes. Ons kan self ons eie voorbeeld noem, die verspreiding van die werkingklouseer vanaf Limpopo provinsie na Noordwes, en kom ons wees bly dat dit net nie baie verder is dit gegaan nie. Ons sit op die oomblik met ongekende verspreiding in 5 provinsies wat nog nooit plaasgevind nie. So dit kan baie vinnig gebeur. As ons kyk na die huidige wêreldwye stand van werkingklouseer in terme van wat vry verklaar is deur die OIE, kan ons sien daar lê die groot risikogebiede. Die groen, daar is almal lande wat alreeds of vry met of vry sonder inenting het, en dan as ons kyk na in terme van Suider-Afrika, sal ons sien op die oomblik is dit net Namibië, Botswana en dan Lesotho en Swaziland en natuurlik Madagaskar daar in die eiland. So in die res van Afrika, kyk Indië, China, Rusland, al daai plekke is nog almal steeds besmet. So wat dink die wêreld in terme van handel as ons praat oor biosekuriteit? Die vereistes, die kernvereistes wat gestel word, is kom dit daarop neer, en dit is waaroor aan ons moet werk, of dit nou 'n voerkralle is, of kommersiële boerdery, of 'n intensief of ekstensiewe boerdery. Dit gaan oor die sanitêre waarborge wat kan word, wat die naaste kom aan dit wat die invoerder vereis. Dit wil sê, as ons uitvoer, dan gaan 'n ander land sanitêre vereistes, biosekuriteitsvereistes stel, wat sy bedryf of sy land se bedryf sal beskerm. En dit is wat ons moet kan aanbied as ons suksesvol wil die kern van die onderhandelingsproses. En dit word dan saamgevat in protokolle wat ook al, maar dit is waaroor dit gaan. So as ons het gesê ons sal werkingklouseer as 'n voorbeeld gebruik. So if you look at that from the spread of foot-and-mouth disease since 1931, don't worry about the other colors. Look at the dark bars that represent South Africa. You see, in the beginning it was going up and down, but then there was control in terms of movement and so on. And then it came up, and then we had exposure or access to very good vaccines. And then the whole thing went down, and there was very strict control about areas of non-vaccinated. But since the beginning of 2010, 2011, it just went up and up, and the occurrence of the disease just went higher and higher. If we look at the figures, current is now the last one is now even more. It is more than 100 now, the total number of outbreaks. I think the last count was 102 or 105. But you see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 provinces that have active outbreak of foot and mouth disease. So why I show this is not to criticize, but to bring reality biosecurity, what I've said earlier about the common factors for the break in biosecurity or the threat in terms of security, the movement and uncontrolled movements and so on. A total lack of realization of importance for preventing a situation like we have here in front of us. So we all know this map. We have the outbreaks in Limpopo, we have the outbreaks in North, in Gauteng, and then the area there in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, what are the main risk factors in terms of biosecurity that we have to take note of? What happened with the foot and mouth disease? It was the move, uncontrolled and illegal of animals that was a main culprit in spread of the disease. The thing that is common, or what has been accepted in South Africa, is the issue of people moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. A good friend of mine with the WHO used the term the ruralization of the urban environment. What that means is that people that move from the rural areas to the urban areas bring their animals with them. So what we see now is around cities, we have people with their animals there, and animals are in many ways uncontrolled, and they use it as a source of. So not only have they brought the animals there, but they also brought the risk of animal diseases and the risk of spread of animal diseases. And this is a reality that we must be aware of, and we've seen it so clearly with the outbreak of African swine fever currently in South Africa. And one thing that we've seen, enough evidence, sad evidence, and that is the movement from auctions, which is a time bomb in terms of the impact of spread of disease, because you have one auction, but those animals move to 10, 15, even more destinations. And that means 10, 15 or more farms getting infected with a disease if this is not controlled. Then also there are occasions which create high risk for biosecurity. That is where people move from the cities back home over Easter weekends and seasonal festivities, where people, not only the people move, but the people also take food along with them back home. And very often this food is infected with a disease and spreading disease. And then what we had in many cases, not only in South Africa, but we've seen a lot of that in several countries in South America, in Brazil, in Uruguay, Paraguay, those places where you have family relationship across borders, which is also a high threat in terms of biosecurity. And then what we often tend to ignore, we talk about quarantining farms or quarantining animals that the animals can't move. That's good, it must happen. But one thing that played a big role in the 2000 outbreak in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Camperdown outbreak, was the movement of people from an infected farm to non-infected farm. People go and visit their friends at the evening or over weekends, and they take the infection with them. And now I think it also played a role in at least 2 or 3 cases that I was in discussions with people, is the movement of people from infected farms to non-infected farms. We must be very careful with that in terms of biosecurity. And then the need for food, the whole issue of food insecurity, the illegal slaughter of animals, and then the movement of those very often infected meat and products. And then I think we must acknowledge that. I feel very sad when I mention that, but it's true. And that is the lack of knowledge of the importance of very quick and fast outbreak response in terms of especially foot and mouth disease outbreak. Unfortunately, many people don't have the knowledge because they were never exposed or had the opportunity to be trained by other experienced people how to manage good outbreak response in terms of disease control. There's such a big gap between people knowing and people not knowing. The people knowing are people mostly on the verge or already have retired, that were actively involved in outbreak response and major disease epidemic control. And then, and this is not only true of the veterinary profession, but also in terms of producers and also officials working in infected areas. And then the last one here that is also important of biosecurity is the people are getting compliant. They blasé about the disease. Oh no, it will come right. Don't worry, we will manage. So if we look at what we used to know about foot and mouth disease, we had the cycle from buffalo that are permanent carriers of disease to impala, which act as sentinels and other game, and then from there to cattle. That was a normal cycle in the foot and mouth disease control areas in Mpumalanga and in Limpopo province. But now the picture has changed. The high risk factors now, okay, it comes initially from buffalo to cattle, but then from there, infected cattle at feedlots, at auctions, move uncontrolled to many other places, and also the whole issue of not being aware or make people aware, farm workers and so on, in terms of biosecurity compliance in terms of disease spread. That is also becoming to play a more and more bigger role in terms of biosecurity. So just to look briefly in terms of foot and mouth disease as an example, where does it link up to biosecurity? It is a high-risk disease in naive populations, meaning if you have animals not previously been exposed or not vaccinated, they are very susceptible because foot and mouth disease is a highly contagious disease. Then, like I mentioned before, it is a multi-species disease in terms of cloven-hoofed animals. Then also for foot and mouth disease, we have the 3 types in South Africa, but they are also a threat of type O, which we had in KwaZulu-Natal, and we luckily could totally eradicate it, but now it is again in Namibia, in the north of Namibia, and also in Zambia. And the whole South African population currently is susceptible, highly susceptible, because it's a naive population for type O and type A. If it comes into the country, it will be a disaster in terms of disease spread. Also, foot and mouth disease, and we know it, it has a very severe trade impact on local, national and internationally. Nou weet ons ook, die siekte is baie hoogs aansteeklik. En dit is duur siekte om te beheer. Dit is nie goedkoop, ons weet dit, maar ongelukkig moet ons daar die geld beskikbaar stel. Dan, as 'n land soos Suid-Afrika gewees het, siektevrye status bereik deur die OIE, dan is dit nie goedkoop om daai status te behou nie. En dit vergeet mense baie keer. Sê, dit is maklik, kom asseblief, laat ons so gou as moontlik iets doen om weer ons siektestatus te herwin. Maar mense moet altyd dink in die voorsiening vir die uitgawes en die infrastruktuur om daai status baie jaloers te beskerm. En dit kos geld. Meer geld as wat dit kos om aanvanklik 'n siektevrye status te bereik. En dan ook moet dit belangrik wees dat ons weet of die siekte, die enstof beskerm bied teen die huidige virus wat die siekte veroorsaak, die back and claw virus. En dan die effek op voedselsekuriteit. And then, lastly, what I said, the whole danger of complacency and not notifying the introductions of disease. And what we seen in African swine fever is also very disturbing and very sad. We only had it in that dark spot there, high up in the northern Transvaal and Limpopo province, and then it started to move south eventually. And many of the reasons what I already mentioned, the need for food, uncontrolled movement, and now it is right through the country, right into the Western Cape. So, but we also have the non-disease biosecurity risks relevant to animal disease control. And if we look at Africa, at the world, the whole economic and socio-economic consequences, the issue of transhumans, especially in West Africa, where people move around at certain time. And we see that at a certain extent in South Africa as well, where we have seasonal workers moving to and fro at certain times of the year. The issue of political instability caused disease in many countries in Africa especially. And then the priority rating of veterinary services. Unfortunately, when a crisis that's not related to animal diseases hits the country, then the money for veterinary services and agriculture for that matter often is money that are taken away to resolve the other priorities. And in South Africa, it is important, biosecurity risk, the whole issue of the wildlife, human, animal pathogen interface, and also the increase in poverty. So for farmers, in short, that we must, time is running out now, is that you should only buy from a reliable source. You must make sure that you get guarantees from the seller of the animals that could be verified, not just sales stock. And then, where possible, let animals be examined before you bring them onto your farm. And then, please, if you're going to keep them live and not for quick slaughter, they must be isolated for a while to make sure there is no disease in that. Even if they were moved, say, no, there's nothing wrong. And it should be away from the other animals. And you should make sure that your isolation facilities are different from the normal farming activities, like separate set of clothes and so on. And like I mentioned, in KwaZulu-Natal in 2000 with the Camperdown outbreak, that was a very important issue. So in short, what must we do in South Africa? We have naive populations currently in the Western Cape, the Northern Cape, and hopefully also in the Eastern Cape. A naive population where the disease is not yet, and animals who are never vaccinated. So they are very, very susceptible for foot and mouth disease. And even a farmer should know what the disease looks like. There are many things now available on the internet and on Google to see what the disease looks like. To know if you see it on your farm, suspect, then you know what you're looking at and you can immediately work that to report it. And also other diseases that looks like foot and mouth disease, like ons kry dit baie keer, beserings van doring, acacia species wat die pek beseer. En ag julle ken nou almal ander voetbeserings in diere. And as I said in the beginning, you must have a biosecurity plan and a contingency plan for biosecurity available on the farm. And you must do a risk analysis of the outbreaks. And if you look on a national scale, and also we are talking about it. We had discussions on that, on the possibility of movement control between provinces from infected areas. Sorry, this thing jumped around. Then also to establish the capacity for immediate outbreak response. That is so critical for biosecurity. And the possible need for a national fund to be available to quickly act on any disease outbreak for foot and mouth disease. And also it's important to know who is in control, and you can't control disease from a distance. You need to be on the spot available and make use of other people also to do that. Okay, and obviously what the OIE code says is also very applicable to South Africa. moet 'n baie effektiewe veeartsenydiens hê. Die siekte moet aanmeldbaar wees, soos in Suid-Afrika dit is, maar dan aanmeldbaar met 'n doel. En voortdurende waarneming, continuous surveillance, vinnige rapportering van 'n siekte en, nog belangriker as dit, is vinnige reaksie daarop. En die bewys van die afwesigheid van virussirkulasie, die skeiding van diere, en dan die bewaring of the maintenance of the animal health measures to prevent. En die OIE kode noem hulle dit, en dit weet ons moet ons ook in Suid-Afrika toepas. So in opsomming, meneer voorsitter, waar staan ons met biosekuriteit? In die middel het jy 'n effektiewe veeartsenydiens. You have in the middle an effective need for effective veterinary services that creates a biosecurity buffer. On the one side, between animal diseases, zoonosin, and things like agri-terrorism, and on the other side of that buffer, you have animal health to concern human health, poverty, food insecurity, and then also obviously the trade and production implications. So if the fact that many of the African diseases has gone to other parts of the world, like foot and mouth disease and so on, and swine fever is moved from African swine fever moved now to many parts of the world. People are getting more sensitive about diseases in Africa. So the trade, the sanitary gears requirements required from South Africa will get more difficult as the time goes on. So we must be vigilant to prevent that situation develop where people are going to ask, hey, but you live in a country where all these diseases occur, what biosecurity guarantees can you give us? So in closing, I think we must be aware and we must be prepared, and we must ask ourselves on a producer base, are we ready and are we prepared? And I think we all don't wish that such a situation like on this slide will ever occur again in South Africa at that scale. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Wow. Dr. Gideon, baie dankie. Dis 'n mondvol en ek dink ons kan maar net geweldig dankbaar wees dat ons 'n persoon soos jy kon kry wat van die OIE af terug is by die huis. Dankie vir jou insette by die Biosekuriteit staakspan. En ek het maar net diep onder die indruk gekom van hoe tegnies van hierdie goed is. En ons is regtig afhanklik van mense soos julle wat al die kennis het, maar ook die praktiese goed verstaan. Jy het die ander dag 'n opmerking gemaak. Ons moet nooit dink dat ons nie 'n verskil kan maak nie. Jy het byvoorbeeld gesê dat kom jy in ander lande, dan as jy in die bufferzone ingaan, is daar baie groot borde wat dit aandui. So hier's 'n klomp huiswerk wat jy vir ons gee. Ons luister graag. En baie geluk ook dat op hierdie stadium is dit definitief so dat die insette wat jy lewer direk omtrent tussen jou en die minister is vir sekere intervensies. Baie dankie. Daar's ongelukkig nie tyd vir vrae nie. Melanie en Nico, dankie vir jou vraag. Nico se vraag gaan spesifiek oor inenting, maar ons gaan vir Dr. Gideon vra om daai een vir ons te antwoord. Ons sal ook moet kyk, dankie Dr. Gideon, die provinsies wat nog skoon is, en selfs die provinsie waar die probleme is, dat ons van die Dieregesondheidsforum spesifiek in die provinsies sal kyk na audits. Ons het mos nou gesien, ons is bietjie ontkant gevang, en laat ons wat die ander provinsies aanbetref, nou die huiswerk doen, dat 'n mens sal weet waar jy is. Dr. Gideon, baie dankie.